Welcome to Automotive Innovators Unplugged, spotlighting the innovators, disruptors, and forward thinkers shaping the future of automotive retail.
Each week, we'll dive into the tools, tech, and strategies that help dealers win in today's market and get a little personal with our guests.
Introducing our host, Sean Kelley, #1 Amazon bestselling author, Special Operations Combat Veteran, and CEO of Car Motivators, known in automotive as the CarViz Coach.
And JP Burkemper, automotive AI expert and co-founder of VinSight, helping dealerships retain customers with state-of-the-art artificial intelligence.
Now it's time for the show. Welcome back to Automotive Innovators Unplugged. Today we're talking about something every multi-store group wrestles with at some point: scaling leadership. Not just growing revenue, not just adding rooftops, but building a self-sustaining leadership team that doesn't rely on one or two key people to hold everything together.
Because here's the truth, you can't scale chaos. You can't scale dependency, and you definitely can't scale burnout. So I'm excited to welcome Tanner Wood to the show. Tanner's been in the trenches building and developing leadership inside a multi-store environment, navigating the real-world challenges that come with growth, alignment, culture, and accountability across all his rooftops.
So today, we're going to unpack what breaks when you scale, what leadership gaps show up, what has Tanner learned the hard way, and what does it really take to build a team that runs strong even when you're not in the room. Tanner, welcome to Automotive Innovators Unplugged.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
Tanner, let's start at the beginning. You graduated with a master's degree and stepped into a sales manager role at your father's Hyundai store. What was going through your mind at that stage of life?
Well, we're in a non-metro area. So I would tell you, growing up in the automotive business, a lot of people knew more about me than I knew about myself. At least that's the way it would seem. I would tell you the challenges being a dealer kid would be many, especially getting into an environment where everyone's trying to figure out who you are, what you're about, knowing that you can, either help them or get rid of them. They assume you have all this authority, even when you may not. I would tell you that growing up, I was blessed to have a lot of pressure and some accountability from an early age, mostly through sports and through school. I definitely would not have gone and got that master's degree had I been given full autonomy, I would say, but it was probably good for me. I like to joke that's like when coaches say that practice is optional. And so I had that optional practice. So I said yes, and I paid my dues, but I wasn't new to the business at that point. I mean, I had worked in parts, I'd worked in fixed a little bit. I was buying used cars for all the stores, so I had a pretty good knowledge of used car environment. I would go and sell cars on Saturdays. So I had a good baseline, I would say. But when I got directed there, I would tell you, it was the first time in my life I'd ever been nervous about anything. I was nervous for about an hour. It wasn't about the tactical side, it was more about the people side. So how I calmed myself down was, number one, there's no challenge that I haven't eventually figured out in my life. Number two, there's a lot of people that, definitely want to see me succeed, so I can lean on them. And number three, I knew how to win the team over. And that was really just two ways. I'm going to work harder than all of you. I'm going to help all of you. And if I work harder than all of you and demonstrate that and do a better job eventually, and then help you sell cars, it'd probably be hard to hate me. So I was able to earn their respect. The sales manager there, his son was also on the floor at the time, and they both thought that I was coming for his job. So that was the resistance in the beginning. So we overcame that, and then it ended up going pretty well. So I was there for about 8 months before I had to go to a different store and take on, say, a more challenging project. But it was probably the most valuable 8 months in my entire career, I would say. Kind of set the tone. We turned things around pretty quickly, and I think at that time the store it was either breaking even or losing a little bit of money, and we ended up, turning that around. So that was cool.
I don't know, that was also a time, if I may say, is when I probably made one of my worst assumptions ever as a coach. You know what I'm talking.
You were my biggest detractor, believe it or not.
I was his biggest enemy. Well, for the record, once I talked to Tanner, I was like, oh, this guy's going to be awesome. But we had only briefly met before that, and Tanner started at the dealership, and I was like, and I was like, okay, he's graduating college, but of course, me being a military and I'm college grad sort of guy, I'm like, how's he going to earn the respect of the team without having sold cars and showing him he can sell? And yes, I'm coaching his dad on that, and afterwards, I told Tanner the truth. I was like, man, I was really concerned when your dad told me the news that my college grad son's going to run the Hyundai store. I was like, why isn't he going to work his way up and sell first and all this? But
I don't think
Tanner,
you knew that I had done that though.
I didn't really know I didn't know your full background. That was one of the assumptions I made. And the other assumption I made was like you wouldn't be able to learn the respect of the team. And you proved me very quickly wrong. So I'm glad it all worked out the way it did. And thank you for forgiving me when I told you about that.
Yeah, I wasn't mad at all. I thought it was funny. I think it's fair.
Well, that's going to resonate with a lot of our listeners, man, because it's such a generational, legacy business. Even me, it resonates with me. I'm in business with my dad's second 2 generations in the business, kind of having that pressure, almost living in their shadows almost. I know that's not how you and I think about it, but, maybe we had a little bit of an easier path carved for us. And
we got the opportunity. That's all you got.
And just taking full advantage of it. And it'll be cool for our listeners to kind of hear how you worked through the ranks and earn that respect, or maybe you're almost it's almost a disadvantage at times. You got the name.
I think it's both.
Right. So
It can be both.
If then it
very
hurts.
cool to hear that.
I had some things, growing up in sports where I didn't get opportunities. And I had to fight. One of the most valuable lessons I learned. I ended up playing baseball in college, but when I was in high school, the coach then had been there for 30 years, and he liked to give all the seniors an opportunity. And I played catcher mostly, and there was a catcher that was playing over me. I was a sophomore, and it felt like it didn't matter what I did. I wasn't getting a chance, and he wouldn't even let me play JV. So I basically lost the whole spring of baseball. But I was mad, and I wanted to change it. And my father told me, he said, you need to stop. He said, it's real simple. You're not good enough. You have to be so far and above better than anybody else that they can't afford not to play you. The reason you're not playing, whether he's a senior or not, is your fault. It's nobody else's fault. And, I didn't want to hear that, but I would tell you that was one of the most valuable lessons I think I've ever learned in my life. And, I think it really translates to the car business and just every challenge. Everybody has problems. We all have different headwinds, but at the end of the day, there's either people that figure it out and take ownership and look in the mirror, or there's others that will say, I couldn't do it because of this. I couldn't do it because of why. And I think if you look around you and you find the most successful people are the ones that always take ownership, regardless of the things that prevent them or make it harder for them to be successful.
It's crazy when I think about Jeff saying that to you directly, especially you as a kid, because you weren't like fully grown up then at that point, right? I mean, that's a
like
very
15,
15. I mean, that's a very candid thing to say to your kid. And I know, I've seen your father communicate with other people in the team so much. And, I feel like if he came at someone else with that, he would use an analogy of some sort. He'd be like, if you had 2 smoothie blenders and, one worked a lot better than the other, which one would you use more? And but with you,
would you use the old one because you've had it forever? Or would you use the new one because it's way better? Probably.
I just pulled that one out of it because I just had a smoothie for breakfast. But it's interesting how parents are like hardest on their own kids, but maybe that's because they want us to succeed more than anyone. It's pretty interesting.
So, hey, Tanner, you kind of brought us through your first few months in the business, the 8 months, and then heading over to the Hyundai store. Is that right?
We were at the Hyundai store, and then we got just a little background so everybody knows. We're a group of 5 stores, an independent body shop, and a Polaris ATV location. Our brands include Toyota, Ford, Lincoln, Chevrolet, Hyundai, and Chrysler, Dodge, Jeep, Ram. At one point, we had Buick and Cadillac as a part of the Chevy store. We sold those back like 3 years ago or so. And then we also had the original store was a GMC, Olds, Pontiac, etc. All those brands that we lost that in 2008, 2009, when GM restructured and got bailed out. They took those away. So the Toyota store was actually dual with GMC. And every brand that we have, we got organically, except for the Chevrolet store in Logan. Everything's based in Athens, Ohio, Southeast Ohio. There's 3 out of the 4 stores, and about 30 minutes north are Chevy and Chrysler. And I believe we purchased the Chevrolet store in 1998, and it was a failing point when we got it. So pretty much all the growth has been organic.
Yeah.
So we got the Chrysler store in 2016, I believe. It was a new point, and I think we kind of started up and running around 2017, and then we had 2 managers. It had gone pretty poorly, and that January of 2019 is when I got sent up there to figure that challenge out.
Tanner, what were the most amount of rooftops you had at one given time?
5.
Perfect. So yeah,
It'd be 7 if you count the body shop and Polaris.
Gotcha. Gotcha. So, obviously some growth there, getting to where you are today, going through all that. That's a lot of, new stores, getting them, having to restructure, what breaks in that process?
Well, I think it depends on your organizational setup to begin with. You have, for us, we've always run kind of lean. And growing up, I watched my dad work like a madman. He's a dealer principal, GM of all, buying used cars. He was a used car buyer, and he just did wear every hat. And he could kind of wrap his arms around everything. And I think with technology changing over time and us growing, that fifth dealership really put him over the edge for that. And as well as a technology, I would tell you today, we spend more time than we probably ever have doing things that have nothing to do with selling a vehicle than we ever have. If you just break down each manufacturer's ownership requirements for a new car delivery, it's psychotic. At one time, even Chrysler, they did this thing called a final delivery inspection. And there's a whole checklist that basically it was a second PDI that the sales department would have to do. And if it didn't pass their specs, they would kick the original PDI, charge you back. And one of those requirements was the battery at 80%. So I'll tell you, in December, January, February, making sure your new vehicles have battery charge at 80% delivering cars and doing the final delivery inspections, it's just not a good setup. Tire pressure was another one. There was times where I was crawling underneath a dually to try to air up the inside tire. I barely get my hand fit in between them to get to it to air it up so that we pass. And sometimes it was not a good way to do things, but that was the process. So I think when you have all kinds of those types of things and the way you claim incentives, co-op, advertising, Toyota has minimum advertised pricing standards you have to live by. Hyundai's gotten a lot of Nissan execs over, and they're turning into a dictatorship at this point in time. They've got, map rules as well. And, with all these changes and all these things they want you to do to make sure they're capturing consumer data, and then you take in the electric challenge that we've all had to adapt to, and now it's leaving. There's just a lot of factors where I think there's lost time that we don't really consider on a daily basis. And I would tell you that a long answer to a short question is, when you're scaling an organization, how do you maximize time and how do you eliminate stupidity? And are you thinking about your team's pain points and where your team is less efficient? They don't realize that they might be less efficient. Do you have systems that are not set up to run smooth? I mean, you think about one of the greatest challenges in our industry today, I think, is software. We have DMS, we've got a service lane tool, we've got a CRM, we've got, every advertising partner has a back end tool, cars.com, Auto Trader, Car Gurus, all of those things. So, you think about when you get somebody on board, especially a manager, and you got a list of 16 to 20 logins you got to get them in if you're innovative, right? JP Insight, that's another login, right? And so you get these people that come in like, oh my gosh, how many things do I have to be logged into? How many tools are we using? You got to teach them how to use every one of them. Are these partners providing value, or are we just paying for a service? It's great that you have a great software, but are you using it? Is there accountability tied to it? Are you getting an actual return? Well, how do you know? How do you measure it? How do you teach your team to look at things like that? How do you make sure they give you the feedback so you can make better decisions? How do you make sure you see a max amount of information in the shortest period of time so you can effectively lead them and ask the right questions? One of the things that they would teach in an ATA school that I think is really good is the first thing they say week one and when they talk about financial statements is, there are no answers in the financial statement. There's only more questions. And it's very, very true. So I think the two biggest factors in scaling a dealership or any business is people and time. Those are the two equations that I like to look at the most.
Yeah, I remember running my own store thinking to myself, if I could just focus on selling and servicing cars, like what is with all these distractions? And I remember that was like the ultimate battle. And I remember just like I would get a bunch of the busy work, non-sales business development activity done. And I'd get to just work deals and jump into the CRM. And I remember just relishing those moments, and that it's amazing how fast you can gain momentum when you do that. But you're right. You have to cut through a lot of clutter. And I think it's a leader's job is not just to give more stuff for our people to do, but to figure out what to eliminate so they can focus on doing what they do best. Great insight. I wanted to ask, Tanner, great insights there. I wanted to shift gears, to talk a little bit about you because and your family dynamic, because this isn't, I think there's a lot of people in your shoes. So working alongside your grandfather, your dad, Jeff, your brother Wyatt now, what has that multi-generational dynamic taught you about leadership?
I would say the number one lesson is that leadership is not just top down. Leadership can go bottom up as well. I think the biggest thing is leadership is a way of how you approach things and how you work with people and the values you embody. Not necessarily, I think a lot of people in the car business have this fallacy of I need to be a manager. Oh, if I could just be a manager, things would be so much easier. I have all these people working for me. Brother, that's when the real work starts. I mean, I can't tell you how many people, they sell cars and they're like, I could do that. Easy. They get in these shoes and they look at me and they're like, I had no idea it was this much. I had no idea that all of this mattered. I look back at what I did as a salesperson. Now I'm an idiot. I wasted, 40, 50% of my day. One of the things that we coach on with our sales team is, I ask them when we do our one-on-ones, and I even help do one-on-ones with our sales managers, store managers, and we don't have conventional GMs. I would be what's considered the GM, but we have a sales manager, kind of a store manager, but they're not accountable for fixed. And that's kind of the way that we have it set up. Part of that's based on how the original structure was. And, we can get into that if you guys have questions, but, I ask salespeople straight up, how many hours a day on average do you think you are not working to move a car deal forward? Some will say 2 hours. Some will say 5 hours. We're typically here 10 hours a day, 5 days a week. So you do the math, right? Let's just say it's 2 hours a day and you're here 5 days. Well, that's 10 hours. Let's say it's a 4-week month. 10 times 4 is 40 hours. So, hey guys, just so you know, you only worked 3 weeks this month. So your production is based on 3 weeks of effort because you just told me that you're not working 2 hours a day on average. So that's a whole entire week that you're here at work and you've done nothing. What do you think about that? So I think a lot of it, I've always enjoyed philosophy. I've always enjoyed the complexity of why do people do what they do. And I love to understand, how actions, how did this person get to this point? And what I found, what I call it is it's the yin and yang. I think it's in every business, but I say it's the yin and yang of the car dealership. And so, the yin and the yang symbol, and it's 2 E's. And the 2 E's are entitlement versus empathy. And you're always one or the other. You're either entitled or you're empathetic. So an example of that would be, if you're in the sales department, right? And, you have a customer, you detailed a car, and you go park it in the service drive, and then you lock the keys in your desk. Are you entitled or are you empathetic? Well, you're entitled because what happens when service gets there an hour before you, they can't find the key and they're trying to start their day, and they can't have the clients pull in the service drive because you've decided to park your car inside. So, the opposite. So entitlement is for me, this is what I need. I'm doing this because this is what I need. Empathy is, what do my teammates need? How can I make their life better? Because I know if I invest in them and I think about how to make their life better and help them succeed, they're going to want to make that mutual investment back in me. So we had a meeting at our Chevrolet location recently, a couple weeks ago, just about entitlement versus empathy. And, we talk about, so we charge retail for parts and service markup on used cars, which is a hot debate in the car business. Do you charge a lower internal rate or do you charge, retail, right? So, parts and service, they're paid on gross, they want to maximize. Sales is paid on gross, used cars, they want to maximize. Parts managers make more money when they charge for more expensive parts. And it's easy because they have OEM programs, for return reserves. We'll give an example for Chevy. You have to have a certain amount of Chevrolet parts that you're putting on stuff. We're billing, aftermarket stuff to a bunch of ROs. We could lose that, right? But if we can get the same part for half as much, that's what we want to do in the used car side of things. So it's everybody's just like this, right? Because we're like, I got to get my money. But, the sales manager didn't realize, hey, when I take an hour to approve a used car, the tech is sitting back there waiting with the car up on the rack with the wheels off, trying to decide whether or not to put the stuff back on and move it outside and go to the next one, and services inventory is time, and people in sales don't understand that their inventory is time, right? So it's just creating that empathy and understanding everybody else in the dealership, and it's up and down. So to answer Sean's question, a great challenge that I had with my father was I was mad at him and resented him at times because I felt like there were some certain things that he should be doing and he wasn't doing them. And it was his job to do them because this is the structure that he created. Well, here's the answer. It's bullshit. It just doesn't matter. And I would tell you the coaching conversation we had made a lot of sense, was honor thy father. And honor thy father is nothing to do with what's right and wrong. It's just honoring your father, literally. Right. So I have to honor him by being respectful, even if he might be in the wrong. I might think he's in the wrong. And ultimately, I quit being, I have an acronym. It's WAB, W-A-B, stands for whiny ass bitch. And I think whiny ass bitch is a very, very, very accurate for a lot of people. And I was being a whiny ass bitch.
I was about to say, you call yourself a lab more often than others, so much respect to you for that.
So I need to not be a whiny ass bitch and figure out how to overcome it. Okay, so he didn't solve my problem. Okay, am I here to identify problems or am I here to create solutions? So I better find a solution. So that's what I did. And it was a harder path, but it's only made me better. So part of the challenge in scaling a family business, I think a lot of people will understand, you especially JP, is, you and your dad have a very different philosophy. My dad and myself have a very, very different philosophy. So, he's looking at like, well, he's used to having control, it's worked for him. I'm coming and changing things. He's feeling like he's not connected, but how does he let go? That's another one of those things. So are you going to be entitled to the way you want them or the way you think they need to be because you're doing them? Or are you going to be empathetic toward one another and understand what each person needs and where you're at? So that's another example of the yin and yang of entitlement versus empathy, the two E's, where I think he and I were both being entitled, but it takes one person to be empathetic and swallow their pride and bridge the gap. And if you do that, the other one, will follow, and then you create a stronger relationship, and ultimately everything grows in a positive direction.
And yeah, that's inside the family and outside the family. As a leader, those two E's come up every day. I like having that empathy as opposed to that entitlement. Nobody likes people that are entitled.
Oh yeah, and it's real quick, I want to say it's putting yourself in their shoes as them,
Right.
not as you. Because it's one thing, we all put ourselves in other people's shoes. And if I was in your shoes, I'd do this. Well, that's your lens. That's your upbringing. That's your background. That's your mindset. What's their mindset? Take yourself out of it. Act like you're a third party. Be objective. Who are they? Who are they and what are they?
That is another level of empathy. No, you're right. It's like trying to really walk in their shoes as them instead of because otherwise you're just judging.
Well, that's being a leader. Being a coach, everybody on the team has a different, unique personality. What buttons to press with each of them, learning that, having empathy, being that person in their shoes, not yourself. It just allows you to get more out of your team, more out of your players. So yeah, it looks like I'm talking to two coaches here on this call today.
Absolutely, you are. Tanner can give me a run for my money.
Well, I've learned from the best.
But I wouldn't be surprised if one day in the not too distant future he can outcoach me. But we'll see.
Yeah, I don't know about that.
And I'm a student of the game as well. But he gets a lot of practice every day.
Tanner, you talked about like early days and kind of having that attitude, like I am who I am. I'm just going to work. I'm going to work harder than you guys. So, I have a question here, like working hard is going to get you further than most. At what point does hustle though stop working in your favor and structure and then having structure take over?
I don't think hustle ever stops working in your favor, but there's a really good saying that if hard work was the only thing that led to success, then donkeys would own the farm. And, there's no donkeys that own a farm. So I think they're separate, right? They also say that hard work beats talent when talent doesn't work hard. There also just has to be a level of savviness and introspection that you have and a little bit of being strategic. I think I put hard work over here on the side. And then how do you channel that effort into intentional things? How do you be efficient with it? Do you come to work with a plan or do you come to work and say, I'm going to do the best that I can today? That's no plan. One of my favorite analogies when I'm doing one-on-ones, it's not really a question. Sean would say a leading question is not a coaching question because you're leading them down the path, right? And he's right. So, I ask him typically, let's say you're driving to Florida on vacation. Your family's in the car, you got all your luggage, you're full of gas, your seatbelt's buckled. What's the first thing you do before you put it in drive and go? Do you know, JP?
Check my mirrors.
Okay, after you do that.
Check. What's that?
After you do check your mirrors, then what?
Tell me.
You set your
Thanks for leaning to one side of the No?
Well, you set your navigation, right? Because you want to know how long it's going to take. With what we have today, Apple Maps and Waze, you know if you got to take a detour, you know if there's traffic. It answers all these questions. It paces us. You know, you're just going to start driving and hope that you get there? No, you're not. Hope's not a strategy, right? You know, if you're going to Florida, you're not driving to Iowa first, right? So a lot of people wake up every day and they're trying to get to Florida and they don't know they're driving to Iowa. So the question I ask them is, you know, for something as trivial as a vacation, you want to know how long it's going to take, how many stops, what your fuel economy is, what place to go, and you make a plan, but you don't make a plan for every day of your life. What are you doing? How does it make sense, right? So I think that's where it starts, because a lot of people, you know, even in sales, like I'll ask them, say, how much money, what's your break-even point? And, you know, they won't know that. Okay, well, let's define break-even point. You know, how much money do you want to make? Well, they'll say, you know, X amount of dollars. I'm like, okay, how many cars do you need to sell to make that money? That's a great question. I have no idea. And what you start to realize when you start asking these questions, especially if you're a high performer, right, is that you've thought through all of these things. You may not have defined it, but you've thought through all of them. And that's why you are where you are, because you've created a plan, whether you know it or not. But a lot of these guys, they don't. And so you have to not just make a plan for them, not catch a fish for them, you know, teach them to fish, that saying, you know, but you have to get down and granular and define all these things. So sometimes what happens is sales manager, you know, will be like, what are you doing all day? You're not doing anything. You're not selling cars. What's wrong? I don't know. They say, I don't know. He said, go figure it out. Go make a plan and go figure it out. Okay. How's that help him? It doesn't, because he doesn't even understand where to start. So I think one of the biggest things, back to the empathy piece, is you have to objectively identify what level that they're at. And then you got to take where you're at and you got to drop that all the way down to meet them on that level. Once you meet them on that level, you can work together and in lockstep and help them level up. But a lot of times, you know, when you have experience and you're a hard worker, you don't realize how much you know, and especially leaders that have humility, right? You know, you've beaten everything down in your mind, like you can do it, so anybody can. But truly, when you're talking to those people, you know, they're not even close to that level. So you can almost, one lesson I've learned the hard way is, you know, some of my base level expectations were unrealistic for some of the people that I was coaching, because I just felt like it was so basic, but I was doing it through my lens, not through their lens. Right. So I think being objective, really, truly objective, taking your feelings out of it, identifying where they're at is really the start.
Yeah, it's so hard to do when you've walked the path of success and you've seen so many high performers. It's like really hard to let go of judgment. But you're right. It's like that's what validates where they're at, and it helps them trust you, and then you can come at them with an approach that they can sink their teeth into, and then you can build from there. I think that's, you know, you prevent the resistance. And you've hired or promoted most of the managers across your stores. Why did you choose to build from within instead of relying? And I know sometimes you do hire from outside, but like, why do you choose to build from within when you do versus rely heavily on outside hires? And when do you choose to do an outside hire rather than promote from within?
I think that's a good question. That's one where I would say, what would I want? You know, imagine being in an organization where you can't get an opportunity. And that goes back to, you know, sometimes there's a few times in sports where I struggle to just get an opportunity. So I love to try to give people opportunities. That's number one, you know, and I wouldn't want to go work on a team that I wasn't considered for an opportunity. You know, if you want to grow and they're not giving you a path forward and they're not even going to look at you for the opportunity, whether you're ready or not, why is that a place you want to be? So I'd say that's the first cornerstone. The second one is they got to want it. You know, I'm not just going to go seek somebody out and say, hey, here, I'm going to tap you on the shoulder. I want to hear from them. Hey, I want this job. And then I want them to ask me, what is it going to take for them to earn it? You know, and when they don't earn it, you know, I want them to say, hey, why didn't I earn it? Because that's how you know that somebody's on the right trajectory, has the right makeup, you know, to be a leader. We had a gentleman that we hired. He worked with us for 4 years, I think. Really good salesperson. Two greatest challenges he had is he avoided conflict and couldn't put it on the table, have a conversation. And the second one was when he got in his head, his performance would fall off a cliff, and it would take somebody in leadership to help him get out of this funk. He couldn't self-identify and self-correct. So those are the two things in my mind preventing him from becoming a leader. And in the position that he wanted, you know, an opportunity for was a finance manager. So I did a little bit of an experiment, and we had an opening. I didn't consider him. I didn't talk to him. I hired somebody else. So that really made him mad. And you know what he did? He quit. He didn't talk to me. He quit with no notice and didn't even tell me. And we had a very, very close relationship. We a lot of calls after hours working together, him trying to grow as a person. So he told me I was right. He had conflict and he wasn't man enough to sit down and have a conversation with me. But I really do care about this individual. And I called him afterwards. I asked him what was going on, and we had about a 2-hour conversation, and I shared with him why. And it was hard for him to understand, but I think eventually he got it. And I told him, I said, here's what you have to understand. It has nothing to do with your ability or what you could do. I know you can do the job. The problem is when there's conflict, and you can even handle your own conflict when you're upset in here, how can you ever work through somebody else's conflict when they're coming towards you or between two other people? How could you navigate that? So what I wanted for you to learn was, hey, how do I deal with a challenging situation where I feel hurt and overcome that? And if we had the right structure, we would also create a plan, and you would have gotten the next opportunity. The crazy part is 2 months after he left, I had 3 finance positions open, and he definitely would have had one of them. But I think that also goes back to over time when you hire people, you figure out what works and what doesn't. And if you feel in your gut that there's something they're missing, you're probably right. And you have to find a way to teach them that in a way, that is not, you pulled him aside, you have this problem, let's work on this problem right now. So it's a challenge, but I would say I look at it like that first. I always look internal first. If there's somebody that wants it, we're going that direction. If not, I'm just going to go outside. And if I feel like, we need what's good about outside is you get another perspective. You could get somebody that could bring something to your organization they didn't have prior. Because what happens is you get a little bit of groupthink going on, and everybody compares each other's numbers, and there's really no other measuring stick, but you get a fresh perspective that comes in. Let's say they blow everybody out of the water. Everyone's like, oh my gosh, what are we missing? So, I would say those are the 2 ways I kind of analyze it.
So these guys that you're hiring up for these leadership or management positions, they got to want it. They got to be able to handle confrontation. They got to have the hard conversations with you. What's another non-negotiable that you look for when maybe promoting somebody within your organization?
Selflessness. Are they willing to take the high road, even if they're in the right? If they're not at their goal of where they want to be, are they staying late? Are they working their day off? What are they doing to get there? Are they people that take ownership of their life? I look for consistency. I think one of the most important things as a leader is you got to be consistent. If you're inconsistent as a leader, that is the number one way to lose your staff. They got to know what they're going to get from you every time. It's got to be fair. I like to share with them when we build a plan to give them an opportunity in leadership. We talk about how every day they're on trial. You're going to make this jump, and all these guys are your friends, guys and gals are your friends. And now you're going to be, a little bit of a step above them. If you didn't do some of these things when you were an equal, and then you ask that team to do them, they're not going to respect you, and they're not going to listen to you because they'll say, hey man, you didn't do this. Why are you asking me to do this? So, what are you doing to earn the right today? It's not just me promoting you, it's your peers promoting you. You should ask yourself, what does it take for all of my colleagues to say, that dude deserves it, or that girl deserves it? And those are the questions that I try to ask them as well.
That is an interesting take on leadership and how you make your decisions, Tanner. Circling back to structure, what do you feel like, what are the roles that are absolutely critical in a multi-store structure that ensure that you can succeed as a whole and as individual stores?
I think that's a very good question. None of our stores are on the same campus. We have a few close, but I'll tell you the greatest challenge in operating a group that runs leaner, that's not all in one, auto mall, hypothetically, is you have to have at least one person in each location that you can trust. And that relationship needs to come with, the first thing would be full commitment. So that first conversation is full commitment to one another, that you'll solve all problems with each other's best interest at heart, having one another's back. I would say that goes along the line of extreme empathy, always considering the other person. Hey, what can I do to help you? What obstacles can I remove? What can I take off your plate? And if you have 2 people that have full commitment and to one another, and also the career and the opportunity, it's pretty hard to fail. But you have to be really honest about problems. You have to set what Sean would call rules of engagement. How do we handle conflict? What is how you need to define the relationship? What is the optimal working relationship look like? I would also say one of the lessons I've learned is you can become friends after you work together, but it's hard to hire friends and then set work boundaries. So, I think it's good to build close relationships and become friends with your team. But it's important that you set the tone. You both understand what the professional expectation is first. So I think there's an element there, and I just think it's honesty, it's transparency, it's just every day we need to make sure we're on the same page. If we're not, how do we solve the problem quickly, move on, no feelings are hurt, and it's actually put to rest.
How do you measure whether leadership is truly like scaling beyond you?
Like, how do I see, the team leading other members of the team?
Yeah, how do you?
Is that what I'm saying?
Yeah, like maybe if you're not there for a week,
Yeah.
how are you measuring whether things are getting done when you are there?
Well, I think it shows in the results. First off, I mean, the results are a measuring stick, right? And that's especially in the car business. We're always looking at, where we at units, where we at gross, how many ROs, dollars per hour, hours per RO, what our expense was by. So if you're getting good results, your leadership's probably there. That's the first part. The second part is, I would say there's a few more parts. One of the another major things is accountability. So I like to joke that I'm a remote employee. I work physically in one store and remote in the other 4. So I have a forecast spreadsheet that we fill out every night. It even paces what we're going to do for the month. We measure year over year. We measure month over month. We measure used cars over 60 days old, measure outbound phone calls, measure visits, measure closing percentage, a lot of these metrics, and they can go get this data in the CRM. But what keeps them honest is they have to go in and put the numbers in there, whether they're good or bad. Nobody that's competitive that's in a leadership position wants to put bad numbers in there, right? So it's driving a little bit of that fire, of how do we succeed? And you really can't succeed without being a good leader. And then it's also, I try to talk to everybody, in each store every day. Hey, what's going on? What do you guys have for the day? How did today go? And then alternatively, I also try to be at every store at least one day a week. Now, when I have problems at certain places and I have to really dig in, like we had some challenges at the Chrysler store in January, I didn't visit one other store the entire month. It was 6 days a week at Chrysler. But I made an extra effort to communicate with the staff, the teammates at the other stores and the managers. And it's not enough just to talk to your store leaders. You need to talk to the staff. And you have to set up a relationship where they feel like they can come to you, but not in a dynamic that would be overstepping, the chain of command. So, I try to talk, hey, how are things going? How do you guys feel about the flow of things? Are there any problems? Anything that we need to discuss? Let's say that a salesperson has a problem with a sales manager. I'm like, okay, well, what's getting in the way? So I ask him a bunch of questions and I'll coach him. And then ask him, how do you want me to handle it? Do you want me to address it with him or do you want to handle it? I always try to challenge them to handle it. If not, I'll try to find a way to bring it up innocuously. Like I was looking at some data and I noticed this, hey, what's going on? And try to facilitate a conversation between them because it really is all just communication. But again, if they have the full commitment to their staff and that communication set in place and they're coaching and training every day, it just kind of organically happens. And I think full circle, it's just culture. So do you define your culture? How do you set your culture up? If you ask somebody, what is the culture of your business and your team and the store? They should be able to tell you, what are your values, right? So I think you have a lot of these things kind of pushing and pulling that ultimately just reinforce everybody leading everybody.
I like what Tanner said there. I coach a lot of managers on doing, like, the higher up you go, the easier it is to lose sight of what the frontline staff is going through. And that's a moving target, right? So I coach a lot of managers on doing what I call skip level meetings, where they skip a level. So okay, instead of you just going to your managers like some super rigid hierarchy, not that you shouldn't have chain of command, right? I love chain of command, but skip level meetings. So you skip down to the front line and you do some of those. And if that's part of your routine, you're really adding a lot of value. And you can take the pulse. Yeah, you take the pulse on which managers might be struggling and which ones might need a little, wake up. That's awesome. Tanner, talking about in the past, and we've had coaching conversations, especially early on in your career. There were seasons where you thought about leaving the business. If you wouldn't mind sharing, what was happening internally during that time?
I had no balance. I'm naturally somebody that's all in or all out. So part of that's just maturing as an adult. The other part of it, I would say, there's a conversation that we had. I think sometimes you get to the point where you can't see the forest through the trees, and you have to take a step back and try to get more context. And it's easy to feel the emotions of what you're going through and want to make a decision, but you need to not make an emotional decision. I just knew the pace that I was at was unsustainable, and I think it's the natural challenge that every person that is a high performer goes through, which is you take on the world by yourself and you solve the problems by yourself. And what we all realize is eventually we only have so much time and you reach a plateau, a ceiling. We have a teammate right now that's wildly talented, but I refer to him to his face and to others that he is a human bottleneck because he is his own greatest enemy, in that what he doesn't accomplish is because, he's not structured with his time. So I think it's the lesson of, hey, I don't have to solve every problem on my own. How do I rely on teammates and create accountability to make sure they follow through? And it's also a level of accepting sometimes 80% of what you would want, because has to be enough for you to accomplish what really needs to be accomplished. So I think it's kind of, readjusting sometimes your expectations, not permanently, but at least in the short term, until you can create a process or something that fixes that. But you can't get too caught up in every detail by yourself. If you solve everybody's problems for them, you're going to create enablement and the people will never grow. And as you grow and the store does better and you solve all their problems and everything's more, all you do is create more work for yourself. So I think that realization was really important, both first that I need to take care of myself so that I can take care of others. I was giving every piece of myself away. I was unhealthy. I was working an insane amount of hours and, it was stupid. And I didn't take ownership of that. So that's part of that, looking inside, not looking at all the factors you're battling. And then it's that other people can solve problems too. And stuff that's time consuming, you need to both teach them and give them the opportunity to solve them, but find a way that, because we're all afraid of losing the deal. We're all afraid of, them messing it up and us having a problem. Well, actually, those mistakes are great because that's how they learn. But how do you create an environment where they make enough mistakes to learn, but not too much that they're detrimental to the business? So you have to, trust but verify, follow up. How did it get done? Those types of things. And I think that's how you overcome that.
I remember when you were going through that season and kind of being a part of that season and how tough of a time that was for you. And I remember, some of the coaching combos, like the epiphanies. I remember when you realized you had a choice. You were like, wait, I can schedule my workouts. I can do golf. Like, it's up to me. These are decisions I can make. And I remember how like empowering that was for you. But it sounds like that process, no different than, you're giving your people the latitude to fail and learn something new. It sounds like that process, I guess. So how did that process teach you about, what did that process teach you about leadership maturity?
I think, like you just said it, you always have a choice, right? There's something I listened to recently that a friend sent me, and part of it talks about how nothing is good or bad, it just is. So we make it good or bad based on our viewpoint, but everything just is. Take it to the extreme. Somebody, I don't go that far. Let's just say that you have somebody that you really care about that's leading a store, and they quit and they give you no notice and they damage that relationship forever. Your first reaction as a person is, oh, that's so bad. It's so bad, right? But it's not good or bad. It just is. It's just the reality of a situation that happened. You never know. You could replace them with somebody better. It could be leading you to a relationship that's more fruitful. There's so many things that could happen. The good or the bad is only defined by you, and there's no timeline on when it has to be good or bad. It just is. So if you just look at everything like it just is, and we'll define it later and just try to understand it, and that part's over, I can't change it. How do I improve things? I think that's a really powerful mindset. It just is. It's not good or bad, it just is. The other part of that I really liked was every step is already the destination. And we all talk about, the journey being the best part, but if you literally think about it, like you're getting up to go walk to your car, every step that you take to your car's ultimate destination, every step is a destination in and of itself. So you think about the ultimate goals that you guys have in business, in your personal life. If you like to play golf, you want to get your handicap to a certain level. Well, you want to get down to a single digit. Every, number you get down to is a step on that journey. And we always look back and say that the journey was the best part. It was never the destination. And then what do you do when you get to the destination? Well, you got to find a new place to go, right? So understanding that every part of the journey is a destination in itself, I think helps you be a little more present and appreciate, the daily grind of it and actually enjoy it. We don't always know when the good times are because they typically pass when we have the perspective, but how could you harness the perspective that the good days are today?
What has to be true internally, culturally, and structurally for you to earn the next level of growth at the Don Wood Auto Group And what's that look like to you?
That's a good question. There's really no roadmap, I would say, based on what others have created for me. Every step that I've taken, I have kind of forced it. I don't know. Ultimately, I'd like to grow, but we have to earn the right to grow. What that looks like is we should have a well-oiled machine with our team and our staff and leadership, and the details, we need to not be missing much. And that's in every facet of the business: titles, funding, rebates, acquisition, sales, service, parts inventory, what's your phase in, phase out criteria, what's your first time fill rate. It's just all of those details, and every leader should have the ability to identify problems and create solutions. And we have a very clear criteria of how we do business and what does great look like. So we're working towards that. We have some we changed a lot in the last year. We changed all of our software. We consolidated a lot of different tools, and we're now a Techion, which has been partially awesome. Time you change DMS, you want to blow your brains out at different points. So we changed our sales comp plan, which was pretty big, because we had the same one for 15 years. Last year we had a lot of growth. We're still in this phase of, I would call it, setting the baseline.
And last month you just had a record February, is that correct?
Yes, we did.
Congrats, buddy.
Thank you. We have to find what our baseline is, right? So I could tell you last year, the bottom line grew about 500%, and in revenue, we were about double. And, I think you find the baseline when you don't have big growth jumps like that. We had a rough January for a multitude of reasons, but we had a record, February. So year over year, we had, on the variable side of things, we had 25% growth in units and 40% growth in gross profit on the variable side. So we got to figure out what the baseline is. Clearly, we're not there yet. We have a lot of opportunity to continue to grow, but once we get into those, neutral or 5 or 10% up or down, I think we've got a pretty good baseline. And the only way you get the baseline is if you solve all the problems. If we're talking football, got to make sure we have a left tackle. So I would call them left tackle problems. Solve all the left tackle problems, and then we can get into the playbook of the routes the receivers are running. So right now we're still trying to tackle those things. And I think once we get there, we'll decide what the next step is. We're trying to layer in some growth in between doing that can kind of support the other parts of the business. Sean's kind of aware of some of those plans.
That leads me to a really deep question. Andrew, you'll know the depth of this question. In a family-run organization with a deep legacy, and for our listeners, the depth I'm talking about here is like, owner grew up in the car business with some of the senior management team and things like that now, right? It's like to that level. Point is, and then your grandfather started it came from the banking world, and he still helps manage the office in some ways, stuff like that, right? So we're talking deep legacy. How do you introduce innovation without creating resistance? I think you've done an amazing job of driving positive change, gaining authority when you need to drive change. But what wisdom or advice would you give to other, dealer principals, second or third generation dealers in your shoes that helps drive innovation without creating resistance with having such a deep family legacy going on?
You have to earn the right. It goes back to the empathy piece. And earning the right is not defined by you. It's defined by the golden rule, which is he who has the gold makes the rules, because it's not you. So that part of that is the respect to, for me, it's my father and grandfather, and, what do they need to see from me to earn the right to make decisions? And then the other side of it is, let's say that you have earned the right, but you're still not allowed. Well, the question then becomes, how do you make it to where they can't say no? So if you can figure out how to create an environment where it's impossible for them to say no, what are the rules of engagement for your family members? What do they want out of their life? The hardest thing is, you work in this business for so long, and then you decide that you want to transition out, but you don't. There's just so many factors. I don't want to lose control. I don't want it to go bad. I don't want my kid to screw it up. I think your business philosophy is different, and I think this is dumb. You're not considering this is a lot of investment in staff. It's an investment, all of the questions, right? The unknowns. But if you can create a plan, and I know it's very generic and probably not that helpful, but if you can create a plan to where they can't say no. For example, one of the challenges in our organization is a good and a bad thing, is we're very loyal to the people that are loyal to us, right? So if that dynamic changes over time, and let's say that the accountability piece was dropped, and and, it's time to part ways, at least in that position. But, based on a friendship, you can't, because it's not your decision. In my position, that I can't upset that apple cart. Okay, well then what are my other options? So one example was, how can I create the person that I need to remove to want to do something different within the business to where it was a win-win? And, my father would say, okay. So that was one of the problems that I solved. I was able to move someone out of a leadership position that was really hurting us, and they're in a different role, and they're creating a lot of value, and we maintain the relationship. So I think the best answer to that question is, you can't accept no. You have to become a no trampoline. And what I mean by that is it just bounces off of you, and you just got to find a different route. Because as soon as you accept an answer that you feel is not optimal or what you need to do, whether you're right or wrong, you're done. And that's a point where you're pointing at somebody else saying, the reason for my failure is you, but I'm telling you it's not. Because there's a way that you can figure it out. It may take time. It may take multiple attempts. It may take creative thinking. It may take, other people being involved. You have to find a way. And if you have the mindset that you're going to find a way, you will. And if you don't, you won't.
I want to kind of shift gears, Tanner, and talk about technology. We talk to a lot of dealers, a lot of people like you that are leveraging, the latest technology, AI being a real topic these days. Are you using it personally? Are you using it in any of your dealerships? And then I guess the question is, what parts of the dealership do you see being automated over the next couple of years?
But say AI is moving faster than any of us could have imagined. I think you're going to see a lot of businesses, a lot of the time-consuming conversations be filtered out with artificial intelligence, a lot of internet lead stuff, a lot of, back-end support things. It's almost kind of limitless. I mean, at this point, AI can even code websites. It can run your Google Analytics to some degree. It can organize, automate a lot of your advertisements on social. It's pretty unbelievable. There's no doubt that it's going to make a huge impact on our business, and it's here to stay. I don't think AI will ever be able to sell, but what I think it can do is I think it can keep people busy long enough to get somebody involved. And I think it can also move them down the process slightly, whether that's creating an appointment or, giving an idea of trade value or educating on why buy here. There's all kinds of things that they can do, but I think it'll allow us to, increase our internet closing opportunities, set up service appointments, and a lot of the things that are time consuming. But I think at the same time, as we have this AI transition, what's going to happen is everybody's going to get tired of dealing with AI. And I really do think at some point, the dealerships that invest in the people to have the relationships are the ones that are going to get the benefit of the doubt in a lot of that business, because people are just going to want to talk to a human. They're not going to want to talk to a computer, because where it goes after they talk to AI, nobody knows, right? What if a person never sees this conversation? Why do I want to work with a business, especially making a huge investment like a car? Why do I want to work with a business that doesn't even want to invest in a human to take care of me? So I think that's a question that our industry has to look at. And I think people are very hip to AI and the way the AI language comes across. I always enjoyed writing in college, and I like to use the M dashes, and AI has ruined the M dash for me, because then if I use it, people think I'm using AI. But I had somebody mad about some transaction. They emailed me, and their entire email was ChatGPT, and I could tell. And honestly, the feeling inside was, I'm not going to even talk to you. If you can't sit and write an email to me why you're upset with how something went, you don't deserve my time. I'm not saying that's the right mindset, but that was my initial reaction. Obviously, we need to take care of the person. But if a customer reaching out to me with AI makes me mad, how would somebody feel that's trying to spend money with your business? So I think being strategic with where you implement it, and then also testing to make sure it works the way that you're supposed to. A lot of times we implement things and we aren't a consumer of our own product, and it has holes that we haven't considered. So I think that's also important. But I would say, just as cliche as it is, there's got to be a balance.
I agree with that. And I think, because of our human nature, AI will be able to do almost anything that a human can do. There's no doubt. But because of our human nature, because we get serotonin and oxytocin from relationships and getting to know people personally and letting people in on our own world, I think that nothing will ever beat relationships. I think relationships will always be kind of the trump card that conquers all. and you can have the best software and technology in the world, but if you don't give a damn about people, you're always going to struggle in the people business. So I do think, I think to your point, Tanner, it's like, I think you're going to have in the future, I'm thinking about these different dealerships. You're going to have the fully automated self-serve dealers, and all that. But then you're going to have the dealers that I think really thrive because they've mastered using both, like leveraging humans and the technology.
Yeah, how do you create that synergy? I think that needs to be the question. But I think what people are looking for is, how do I replace my human capital with robots? And what they're going to find is they're probably going to go backwards, because
Maybe not immediately, but I agree with you. Why do you say that?
they see an initial boost, but eventually what happens is people are not that down. They'll know when they're not talking to a person, and especially principal people are going to go and they're going to seek out the people that actually want to work with them, not the ones that pawn them off on a computer software. Because that just tells you, you're a number, you don't matter. So I think people want to matter. You have to make that client number one, every time that you work with them. And if you don't, you're going to lose their business.
Yeah, it makes sense. I just wonder, do you think that there's ways that, we can leverage technology to make the customer experience and journey that much more valuable?
Yeah, I think there absolutely is. I mean, for nominal questions, right? Little things that could help them, whether that's if they take delivery of a new car and they forget how to operate something. JP, you have something in your tool that really emphasizes how to make the ownership experience great. And, how many used cars get sold with manuals? Not very many, but if you had an app that could tell you everything you need to know about it and it was easy to access, I think that's really valuable. I just think when it comes to selling, people are going to get inundated with AI responses. And even, I'm very against email templates in our CRM and text templates. I hate them. And I try to avoid using them because everyone knows it's a template. You're acquiring 5 dealerships. You got one salesperson that sends you a personalized video and you get 4 other templates. Who are you working with?
I'm going to the video guy.
100%, right? So, people are trying to get through stuff faster, but faster doesn't always mean better.
Yeah. This is my final question for you. And this is a bit of a coaching question as well.
Okay.
Because I can't help myself. So if you stepped away from the dealership group for 90 days, that's 3 months, right? What would need to be true for Don Wood Automotive Group to thrive without you?
It's a great question. It's a question, truthfully, I don't know that I can fully answer.
I just wanted to plant that little bug in your head for our next coaching convo.
What it does is it makes you think about the areas that everybody's relying upon you and no one else has the ability to do some of those things that you've taken on. So what would have to be true would be, how do I split up my responsibilities within the team where certain people's strengths can take on that piece of it without losing momentum? And then how do you create an accountability structure to ensure it gets done between each person? So I would say, if you had a definition of my responsibilities, you would assign them to other people and create a daily, weekly, and a monthly, guide to this needs to be done when, and then figure out how their partners, if they each can hold 1 or 2 other people accountable, and you get this cross back and forth web of accountability of, hey, did you do this today? Did you do this? And then they'd be like, hey, did you do this? So I think every teammate would have to have a piece of that. That would be my answer for now.
That's a great answer, man. I just visualize almost like a network of responsibilities. It's like you're doing this because you're good at it, and you're going to hold this person accountable to doing that because they're good at that, but you're going to be there. And it almost creates like a network of leadership and management that could kind of hold up the fort while you're gone. Interesting. Great answer.
Yeah, you'd have to have, every person, I would say, would have to have 2 people that they hold accountable. And then in return, every person would have 2 people holding them accountable. So where one person might miss something on the accountability piece, hopefully the second one would pick it up. But that's compounded by the culture and the mindset of the way that we're operating. And with everybody leading one another and the iron sharpens iron mentality, I think 80 to 90% of the challenges would be solved with a little friction.
That's awesome. Let's do it. Let's call your pops and let them know what we're doing. We're going to have a 90-day vacation. Tanner's off for
That's not going to happen.
No, I actually really like the stuff about having an accountability partner no matter what you're doing. It's nice having somebody in the fight with you,
Yeah. Well, we already kind of do that. Part of the conversation, that full commitment is, hey, like, if I'm doing something dumb, I want you to tell me. If you disagree, and now I'm going to try to, if I disagree with you, I'm going to tell you why I disagree. But if you battle me and I battle you, I have to think that we're going to come up with a pretty good idea or plan.
And being constructive with it. Yeah.
Yeah. I think a lot of times, human nature is a funny thing. A lot of us put a chip on their shoulder. We have to prove something to somebody. But you think about it, at the end of the day, nobody really cares, what you achieved. They care more about the impact that you made on them and who you are as a person. So I think, I like to consider those things a lot. I think about Elon Musk, right? Will we agree that he's the most legendary entrepreneur of our lifetime? Yeah. How often a day you go to him? How often do you think about
At least 5, probably. Because I subscribe to all my stuff.
Well, a lot. But yeah, now it seems like it's settled a bit, and you don't think about him as that much.
And when you think about him,
But
you
you
think
definitely think about him more than anybody else.
But do you think about him in terms of, wow, he's so amazing? What an amazing person. Do you think about that, or do you think, oh wow, Elon's doing this, and then do you move on?
For his accolades
Do you
and
think
for his
those are
brain.
okay? Consciously on a daily basis, are you thinking about his accolades in his brain?
No.
How many times a month?
Man, if he comes onto the news.
Yeah, all right. So it's not even brought on by you stopping the damn thing. Oh my gosh, Elon Musk's amazing. Something pops up on your feed, right? And it enters your bubble. So if the most legendary entrepreneur of our generation affects your life none, what does it matter what the three of us do?
Yeah, that's valid. Wow. That's almost depressing. Look at both of you guys. Yeah.
Yeah,
No, but that's a really good point. It's like, stop worrying about what other people think. And
exactly.
you find a better purpose for what you do.
It really is about how you make the people feel, and that matters to me.
The impact that you have on others in the personal relationships, and how do you help others grow? And when you die, I think about death a lot, not literally die, just as a perspective tool. And what would you want people to say about you at your funeral? Are you living by those things every day? What is it? There's another thing I saw once that I thought was really good. And it was a pastor talking about, he asked the guy a question, and he goes, does an apple tree eat apples? And you would laugh, right? You would say no. Does a pear tree eat pears?
My knee-jerk answer is no, but then I think about how the ones that fall that decompose, and then they do. I go,
I mean, you could look at that literally, but the fruit of the tree is not for the tree. Will we agree? The fruit is for the animals and the people that pass by. That they benefit from the fruit of that tree. So the analogy is we are all trees. Well, the fruit that we create is not for us, it's for others. And what we gain in return is wisdom. And we reap the benefits of the fruits of others, And I think that's a really good metaphor and living life, which I think ties back into the empathy piece and the considering other people. And ultimately, my mission in life is not about me. It's about, how do I help others? And that's what I want it to be. That's what I try to go back to. If, we're all guilty of having selfish motivation in areas, but that's a piece that helps me kind of stay grounded. And, ultimately we summit this mountain in business, let's say it was a big goal and you're really proud of yourself, and it's really great for you. And it's important to understand that you should be proud of yourself. You reached something that was really tough, but no one else cares. No one cares what you hit, your batting average was in high school. Nobody cares about your high school awards, and nobody wants to hear about them. At the end of the day, in our minds, we're all our own biggest fan. I think it's important to understand that nobody cares unless you have a really, really close relationship with someone that really does, and they want to hear about it. But the average person doesn't. So I think it's just being objective with how you fit into the space, and what is your mission in life? Christianity is a very important aspect of my life. And, I certainly fall short all the time, but, how do you be a good steward of the blessings and the things that you've received in your life? And how do you multiply them and also give and help bring others up? And I think that's a really good business and life philosophy to live by.
Where do you want your business to be? Like, what's it look like structurally over the next, I'm going to say 20 years? Is it more rooftops, deeper market penetration? Is it stronger per rooftop performance? Or is it kind of just being that tree? Is it just making people feel good while they're passing by Don Wood and just, being that household name that people respect?
I don't care. Truly don't. I'm not attached to the outcome of where we end up. My motivation is to continue to challenge myself, to reach the ceiling and break past it. And whatever happens as a result of that, that's wonderful. And in the process, right now we have around 150 families that work here. And the goal is to maximize their earnings, to create the most autonomy in their life, and help them live the best life possible. And if we earn the right to grow, then we'll cross that bridge. And, I'm not in the car business for money. We need to make a living, right? But I like the challenge. I like the competitive aspect of it. So the growth is really just going to come from, can we do it? Is it a smart business decision? Have we earned the right to invest and risk the capital in this growth opportunity? What are the consequences? All of those questions. And then, I'm just going to enjoy every day. I'm going to enjoy the grind. I'm going to enjoy the learning and the growing, and I'm going to enjoy the defeats probably more than the wins, because that's how you actually get better. And, when I picked my head up in 20 years and see what the combination of every day added up to, I'm going to have gratitude for the journey and the people and the relationships that I've been lucky to build. And, hopefully at that point, it will have helped a lot of people, and, a lot of those people will have helped me. And really it's just about making the most of our time here, to me. But yes, if it's 20 stores, if it's 40 stores, that would be wonderful. That would be a lot of fun. But, you can't really plan that, there's a lot of luck. The last thing I'll say is the story of the two farmers. I really like two farmers in a drought, and they each prayed to God every day for rain. One farmer prepared his fields and the other one didn't. Which one do you think got the rain? JP? The one that prepared his fields, because he had faith that God would provide the rain. So we're going to prepare our fields.
I like it. That's awesome.
If there's one lesson that I would encourage people to take away from this conversation, is that if you're ever left with a question of investing in the right people or investing in software or things, always invest in the right people, because that will always give you the greatest return and create the most opportunity as time goes on.
Powerful lesson, Tanner. Thank you for sharing. Tanner, this conversation hits where a lot of dealership operators live, right between growth and overwhelm. Scaling isn't just about adding stores. It's about building leaders who can think, decide, and execute without constant supervision, and people who truly have a passion for being in the moment and for doing what they do every day in their leadership role. But what really stands out to me in this conversation is that sustainable growth requires intentional leadership development. It doesn't really just happen on accident. So for anyone listening who wants to scale, remember this: you don't build on a multi-store group by being the hero. You build by developing other heroes.
If today's episode gave you clarity or challenged your leadership thinking, share it with another operator or another GM who's in the middle of scaling. Thanks for listening to Automotive Innovators Unplugged. We'll see you on the next episode.